Thank you, everyone who's just joining us and putting your name. Please continue to put your name in the chat where you're from so that we can get an idea of who we're talking to. And we'll go ahead and get started. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for the third session of our training series on the 7 core issues in adoption and permanency. For those of you who attended our first 2 sessions, welcome back. And if this is your first session, welcome. We have our recordings from the previous 2 sessions on our Children's Bureau YouTube channel. So I'll post that in the chat in just a minute. So please check those out when you're done with this training. They're similar on the same theme, but different information. So I highly recommend you check that out. Also check out the book that we are speaking from, the 7 core issues in adoption and permanency. You'll hear a little bit more about that. And then a few logistics before we get started. Once this webinar has ended, when you go to click the exit screen, you'll be directed right to a Google form where you can fill out the survey. And then once you're finished filling out the survey, it'll go ahead and send you your certificate just automatically to your email. So please make sure you fill that out. And then one last thing, just a reminder, everyone always asks every session, I can't see myself, I can't hear myself. So just a reminder, since we're on a webinar platform, you won't be able to hear yourself and we can't hear you and we can't see you. We can only see the panelists. So unless you have a question, in which case you can type it in the chat, or you're welcome to raise your hand and then we can click you so that you're unmuted. Otherwise, you can also save your questions to the very end. We'll have a Q&A session for the last few minutes. So please continue. You can also comment in the chat. We love to hear from you as the session is going. Sorry, that's my cat, Barnaby. Okay, so I'm just gonna pass it over to Cindy now to introduce our amazing presenters who are with us for a third time. And we're just so glad to have them here this morning. So I'll pass it to you, Cindy.
Thank you so much. And oh, we are so glad to have Sharon Kaplan-Roja and Allison Davis-Maxon with us today to talk more about the 7 core issues of adoption and permanency. And I just wanted to share their book. It is an amazing, amazing book. And I encourage all participants to purchase this book because it is just an incredible guide to everything we do in terms of working with families and children. And I just appreciate having this by my side all the time. So Allison is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's the executive director at the National Center on Adoption and Permanency with 27 amazing years of experience in adoption practice and child welfare. She is a consultant, clinician, and trainer, as we well know. And we just so appreciate having you here today. And Sharon Kaplan-Roja, someone I have known for well over 30 years. She got me interested in adoption, actually, adoption work. And I remember taking adoption clinical training with her, actually several times. And Sharon is a consultant at the National Center on Adoption and Permanency. She was the developer of the 7 core issues in adoption and permanency in 1988. She has 55 most amazing years of experience in clinical adoption practice in the field of child welfare. And it's such a privilege to have you here with us today. I'm so excited to learn with you and from you today. And I'm going to pass it over to who goes first, Sharon?
Yeah.
Sharon, I'm going to pass it on to Sharon. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome back. It's so nice to have you back, and some of you for the first time. I really am glad that you can go back and look at the first presentations because we have already taken a good look at the 7 core issues through the lens of the infant, child, teen, and adult adopted person. And then last month, we looked very deeply through the lens of the birth first parents. And this month, we're looking specifically through the lens of the core issues for adoptive, foster care, and kinship families. Something very near and dear to my heart. I am a parent by birth, by adoption, by foster care. Allison has been a parent by birth and kinship care. So we bring to you a lot of personal experience. And before I jump in, I want to thank Allison for doing this with me. It's been such a joy always to work with her, my compadre, my co-author, and most importantly, my deep friend and a phenomenal clinician and presenter. And I want to thank Michaela and Cindy for having us do this together, because it's been a pure joy. And I want to be able to say that at the beginning and not at the end. I feel very personally connected to this topic, and so I will share some stories that come directly from my life experience as well, all of which have been cleared by the children involved, although I'm not using any names. Again, we refer you to our book that Cindy was just very kind to talk about. And the reason that this topic is so important is that Allison and I both believe that children can only get as far in their healing as their parents. If their parents are stuck somewhere in the core issues, that's where the children are stuck. So it becomes very important that we examine the core issues, hopefully in our pre-certification, in our pre-placement, in our pre-training, and then continue to look at those issues in our follow-up support groups and so on, because it's often where you'll see families coming in for therapy, not feeling like their children are changing, feeling caught and sad and overwhelmed. Is often it's them. They're stuck in this cycle of the core issues. So remember, kids only get as far as their family gets in examining the core issues, because parents are the leader of the band. Parents are the leader of the band. Allison and I have written a workbook that she's going to be referencing pretty deeply in the second half of the presentation this morning, that will help adults examine at any point where they are in the core issues journey. And we're very excited that workbook will be out and available in 2022. And I really believe that it's never too late to learn about ourselves and to continue to grow. I want to read you a poem from a fellow colleague and an adoptee on the East Coast, Dr. Joyce McGuire Pavo. And I happen to really resonate to this, so I wanted to share it with you. You cannot change the truth. These are your children, but they come from somewhere else. And they are the children of those places and those people as well. Help them to know all about their past and all about their present. Help them to know that they are from extended families, that they have only one parent or set of parents, but that they have more mothers and fathers. They have grandmothers, godmothers, birth mothers, mother countries, Mother Earth. They have grandfathers, godfathers, birth fathers, and fatherlands. They have family by birth and family by adoption. They have family by choice and family by chance. Childhood is short. They are our children to raise. They are our children to love. And then they become citizens of the world. What we do to them creates the world that we live in. So give them life, give them their truth, give them love, give them all that they came with, give them all that they grow up with. Your children do not belong to you, but they belong with you. You cannot keep them from what is theirs, but you can keep loving them. You do not own your children, but they are your own. That says it so well, I believe, as we begin this journey. And we do talk about this as a lifelong intergenerational journey for all of us, even our extended family. We're all in this boat together. When one rocks the boat, it affects everybody else. At the very least, it makes us a little seasick, and we can feel it in our hearts and our tummies. It's important to remember, and we've said this each time, that this is not to pathologize adoption, foster care, and kinship. It's to depathologize it, to say that the way that our families are formed is different. And therefore, we have additional challenges. We're taking some side roads. It's not always a straight path. It's not the one we grew up with, unless we grew up in foster care or grew up as an adopted person or grew up in kinship care. So it may feel very unfamiliar to us, but that does not make it pathological. So when people hear about the core issues and they say, oh, that's so depressing, I just remind you that it's not about being depressing. It's about being realistic. It's about being grounded in the truth. This is our original, when I came into the field in 1963, this is what we did to describe the adoption community. It was birth parents, and really we were talking here about birth mothers. It was child, it wasn't infant, teen, and adult adoptee, and it was adoptive parents, not foster to adopt, not kinship. Our world has changed dramatically, as it should. And this world, in this triangle, is anchored in secrecy and shame, something that we really hope that examination of the core issues minimizes. It allows people to talk to each other in a more realistic and honest fashion and develop, therefore, deeper attachments. One of the things certainly that has changed is language, because as we've said each time, language can be a way of coming together, connecting, attaching, or finding similarities, for instance, or it can be about separation. It can feel demeaning. And certainly one of the words that's still with us today that was part of this triangle and is still part of today's core issues is the word real. Who's real? And I know that Allison will be talking a little bit more about that. We're all real. That's why we're all in the core issues together. We're all real. We all have meaning to the infant, child, teen, and adult adopted person. But initially what we saw, and the words that we used to describe prospective adoptive parents, was that they were infertile and desperate, that they were rich religious professionals, they were married, they were straight, and they got studied, they got stamped with approval. And that home study, now we know it's a family assessment, but that home study left me as a prospective adoptive parent at that time feeling like a piece of meat that somebody stamped prime on my rump, and it lived there for the rest of my life. I had to live up to that approval, that acceptance. And I've shared this before, but I remember being on the freeway with my husband coming home from LA, from an agency we were working with there. And I'd already been in the field for a few years, and we had a 6-year-old daughter. And I just remember saying, my God, what if they turn us down? Does that mean I have to turn in my college degree and give up our firstborn child because I'm not good enough to parent through adoption? Think about the depth of that experience, even for somebody who had already worked in the field for a while, understood what family assessments were all about. And we also looked at adoption at that time as a step up in the world, a trade-off. So we were looking for families that had more to offer than the birth first family who might not be able to parent at that time in their life, because it was a trade-off. We somehow knew that if we didn't give that child something more, then the reason for the adoption didn't have efficacy. It wasn't based on something that was worthwhile. Those of us who worked with prospective adoptive parents, and again, we weren't talking about foster to adopt or kinship, we often were placed in more beautiful buildings, in more special offices, because it was a privilege to work with those folks who came to us educated, wealthy. It was a privilege to do that work. Probably the biggest thing is that it was closed. It was closed. In fact, I remember when I came into the field, we had separate waiting rooms for foster parents, for birth first parents, and for prospective adoptive parents. We didn't want them to meet, and we compared calendars at staff meetings to make sure they wouldn't run into each other in the parking lot. Can you imagine? Imagine where we were then and how far we've come. But we still know that a lot of these feelings are the backdrop for adoption today. A lot of these thoughts about what people are going to have to go through are still in the backs of the minds of the folks that we're working with today. We asked people to act as if they had given birth to these children. And largely it was a female-led experience. And what our belief was about foster parents was that they were in it for the money, that they were suspect. And we discouraged them, and in many ways had them sign papers that they would not attach to their children. We kept moving kids because we didn't want the temporary parents to become attached to their children. That's the backdrop. That's the backdrop of our practice. And those are many times still the stereotypes and the myths that abound today that keep people from coming in to offer themselves for foster adoption services, for adoption of older children or sibling sets. It keeps some of our communities reluctant to come in and share the deepest parts of themselves with strangers. What I remember is doing a family assessment for a family that was from Cambodia. They were Chinese Cambodians, and they had a relative left behind after the Khmer Rouge and the killing fields. And they needed to get that child out of Cambodia. So they came for a family assessment. And aside from all the things that we had to do with senators and so many things to get that to happen, when it was all said and done, that family showed up at the office with a ton of gifts. And oh, no, we can't do that. You know, we can't accept anything. And I remember the look on this man's face, and he said, but you took all my privacy. You know everything about me. I have to buy back my soul. You don't understand what this means in my culture to give away all my private pieces of myself to a total stranger. So when we think about practice and what that means to folks, and some of which still is part of who we are today in our work, it's not like all this stuff went away. As you know, this is the new triangle, the new encompassing of the core issues, a new image to think about for our foster, adopt, and kinship families. All of us constellation members, and for those of you who haven't heard that term yet, all of us who've been touched by the institution of adoption, foster care, and relative caregiving are constellation members. That includes our other children, our nieces, our nephews, our parents, everybody. We're in this together, and we're all surrounded by attachment challenges, either from our own childhood and also what the children that we're parenting bring to us. We're all surrounded with trauma, either from our own childhoods or from the trauma that our children coming into our families unpack in our living room. And we're all connected, the 7 core issues of adoption. So I would ask you to think about the following things, and these are good things for professionals and social workers that are on this webinar, and good things for parents to be thinking about. But what trauma do you carry? What are your triggers as a professional, social worker, therapist? And what trauma do the adults that come to you who are on their journey? What trauma do they carry, and what are their triggers? What are the children apt to bring into that family who look so healthy to you right now? What are your attachment styles? What work have you done on your own core issues? Where are you on your journey? And what expectations do prospective families or families already in this journey carry what expectations, what fears, what secrets? Let's be clear. Let's write them out. Let's journal them. Let's make a list. One of the most powerful things I did years ago as a social worker was to have prospective families create separately image boards. I want an image of the children you think you're going to parent. Sometimes those image boards were entirely different. They weren't the same. Well, that was a clue right away that we might be in some trouble here. And sometimes what they said they imaged was certainly not who was going to arrive at their front door. And that becomes a problem because I got to tell you that no social worker ever described accurately the child who was coming in my front door. Partly is that children change, partly is they weren't living with the child, partly is children are different with different adults. But never did we get accurate information. We had to be open and adaptable to whoever arrived. So an image board, what is it that you're thinking is going to happen when your children arrive? This, to remind you, is the image of the core issues. And if you're not already familiar, we go deeply into it in the online pieces that Children's Bureau has posted already, and it's certainly explained in the book. But everybody, every prospective adoptive, foster, and kinship family member comes into this with losses. We all start out in a hole. We have to dig our way out, and that's what the work is about. First, we have to acknowledge the losses. What are they? And we have to recognize that those losses trigger feelings or fear of rejection, which affects our self-esteem. It certainly elucidates issues of shame from our own childhood and guilt for how we may react to all of this as it unfolds. Issues of grief. We all need time to grieve, and we're going to talk about how hard that is when you're really busy and you're drowning at home. It changes everybody's identity. And if we don't master that, it's really difficult to build the kind of deep attachments that are required for honest and open and vulnerable intimacy. And ultimately, everybody's goal is mastery and control. What are the gains of doing this work? How do we change? I think a lot about that. What did I get out of this long career? What did I get out of parenting children with really high needs? And why didn't the social workers who tried to prepare us have the answers that were truthful and adequate to what it was they were asking us to take on when we took on a sibling set? And if I knew then what I know today, would my children be very different as adults? That's why these trainings are so important. That's why the deeper we do the dive, the more valuable we're going to be to the families that we're shepherding through this journey. But first, we have to know where we are on it. So keeping in mind that adoption is about disassembling and reassembling of families on their various family trees, it says here that we impact up to 16 trees. And I have to tell you, I saw online a few months ago something called ancestral mathematics. And I thought this was fascinating. In order to be born, each of us needed 4,094 ancestors over the past 400 years. Each of us needed 12 previous generations. Part of that is what gets passed down through our DNA. Any trauma that was passed down through our DNA. Traditions and values, ways of relating as a family. So how many struggles did your ancestors have? How many battles? How many difficulties? How much sadness? How much happiness? How many love stories are you aware of? How many expressions of hope did your ancestors have to undergo for you to exist in this present moment? And why is that important? Well, because if there's two parents in the family, now we're talking about over 8,000 ancestors. coming together to form a relationship. That's the nurture part of the parent-child experience. And your child comes with over 8,000 ancestors coming into your home. That's the nature part. Nature and nurture come together in our families formed through adoption, foster care, and kinship care. Think about the power of that. Think about what it is we're having to, first of all, wrap our arms around when we come together with a partner, and then what we have to do when we bring multiple children or children from different birth first families over time, how much of that ancestral nature work we're having to include in our nurture, which is why I've always said adoption is much more like a marriage than it is a biological connection, because you are embracing people just like you did when you got married, who come with a very different set of backgrounds. I would ask you then to think about how you feel about other members of the constellation. Do you know any? How familiar are you? Do you go to cub retreats, Concerned United Birth Parents? There's going to be a big one here in Southern California next month. What do you know about that birth first parent experience that you can teach the families that you're shepherding on their journey? How many of those folks live in your life? And how do we balance that every one of them has things in common and every one of them is dealing with it individually, differently, based on their own backgrounds? And what will your support system be like? And will they be naysayers about your adoption and inclusion and the truth telling that's required? Are you open to learning? Does the community that you live in reflect the children that you're looking to graft onto your family trees? Will they see images of themselves where you pray, where you live, and where they go to school? And how much reading of books and subscribing to magazines? What do you have in your offices as professionals that shows that you know and you are up to date? What was the last conference you attended? How much do you talk about these issues as a staff? And one of the things that I find is very important for families that they go public, that they tell their family, they tell their friends, that they share their emotional pregnancy, that they share their emotional pregnancy, that they grow and talk about what they're learning and what their fears are with you as professionals and with their family and friends. So everybody's kind of ready, because one of the questions that families get is, where did you get those kids? Where were they before? So we looked at loss, because every constellation member suffers a profound life-altering loss before they gain anything. And I know Allison's going to go into great depth. But remember that one of the big losses is privacy. Privacy, control, entitlement. Privacy. Boy, you're opening your home up to total strangers. And I got to tell you, as we continue that journey, and here I was already in the field for a while, and I was already an experienced parent. And when in would come a young, right out of graduate school, social worker who had not yet parented, assessing me and giving me advice. That was tough. That was tough. So something we need to be conscious of. So we may have lost our dream family. We may have lost the stability in our family, as Allison discusses attachment and trauma. We now have a stranger in our midst that we have to claim and make a family member, make a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week commitment to, even if we don't know if they're going to stay or not. even if they have nothing yet to give back to us, even though there's not yet any attachment. We have to learn a different way to parent. That's a loss. It wasn't how we grew up. We have to deal with a change in our roles because we're not we're not the only mother or father. We may be the only parent. And that's part of what was in that poem from Joyce Pavo. We may be the only parent, or we may have a partner that parents us, but we're not the only mothers or fathers. So our role can be confusing and feel like a loss. Other people have questions. They stare at us. Family and friends have concerns. They don't validate us. We're seen different in the community. It's not really a family. We've missed time together, and we have information that's missing. We may be out of sync with our peers, depending upon when and how we came to adoption. We've missed all the usual rituals, usually the naming, the showers, the baptisms, the brisses, all the things that families do to incorporate a child into their family system. We may be having multiple children arriving with multiple needs who may be one age on a birth certificate, but a different age in every other way developmentally. We may be parenting in the dark. There were so many things that I didn't know about my children. And had I known them, it would have made life easier. One of the things I remember is watching our daughter at 6 lose her naivete, who wanted to know, and we had told her, if something ever happened to us as parents, you've got grandma this and grandpa that and grandma this and grandpa that and aunts and uncles. And so when she said, well, how come those children need a home with strangers? That was her words, with strangers. Where are their grandparents and aunts and uncles? And as she asked those questions, her voice went higher and higher, and you could feel her anxiety at 6. She just always assumed that children would grow up in their family. It never dawned on her. And then when she went to introduce them and she skipped down the streets of Huntington Beach, people were saying, those can't be your siblings. They don't look like you. They're a different race from you. Where were they? Why are you lying? So her pride in introducing her siblings turned to tears. So our other children can have losses. Our nieces and nephews who were very close to us, who suddenly don't hold that same frame in our household. It's no longer them coming over to visit, having their toys in their room to hang out in. Now there are other children there. And we've also talked each time about different kinds of losses. The vicarious losses. You know, when we do a family assessment and we talk about how healthy they are, what a great background they come with, the lessons they've learned, the therapy that they went through, the infertility challenges, if that's what brought them, or the fact that they have 3 boys and they've always wanted a girl and they've been great parents. Their kids are doing great. And we place children with them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 children with them. And those children come in because feelings are catchy, and they unpack their little suitcases of emotion, and everybody catches their trauma, their attachment challenges, their anger, their fear. And suddenly nobody looks healthy. And you think, what did I miss? What did I do to place these children with this family? That is an example of vicarious losses. Part of our work is to begin to inoculate families. We want them to catch the feelings, but also know how to process those feelings. To have some, if you excuse me, immunization about how to respond, how to stay safe, how to stay healthy, how to keep the other children in the family healthy. Ambiguous losses. I have so many families who talk to me about the fact that they have real empathy for the birth first family, and they also don't like them and are angry about what they did to the children that they're trying to parent. They're also afraid of them. They're also afraid of them. They want them to succeed, but they also want to raise these children permanently. That's an ambiguous loss. They want to love these children, but they're afraid to, because what if these children don't stay? And when I say to people, nobody knows how long their children are going to stay. There's no guarantee whether they come home to you through birth or adoption or foster care or kinship care. Every parenting is a day at a time, a minute at a time. We have to claim our children and love our children because none of us knows what's going to happen. We want to attach, but we hold ourselves back because we're afraid to be totally vulnerable. And a whole ream of secondary losses. Every time somebody questions our relationship to our children, where did you get this child? Whose children are these really? Who are the real parents? When you're parenting without the full force of the law behind you, that's difficulty every day, secondary losses every day. When you deal with the school, when you deal with pediatricians, when you're dealing with therapists, when you're dealing with social workers, when you can't fill out medical information in an office because you don't have that information. Maybe you don't have the right to it yet, or maybe it's missing. But if you can't fill them out, that's a secondary loss. When you don't know why your children are struggling in school and you don't know what the history, the learning history is in the family, that's a secondary loss. And that constant question about why can't you have your own children is a piece of the same. Why would you want to take on somebody else's problems? Something I heard all the time. Are you crazy? Why are you doing this? Why would you mess up your family? And then also dealing with these losses with our extended family. How do our parents feel about these newly arrived children? Do they feel the same about them that they do their other grandchildren? Also parts of the secondary losses. And all of this brings us to issues of rejection. Do we feel rejected? Are we fearful of rejection? There's so many people who could reject us in this process. Social workers can reject us. They can say, oh, no, we don't think that you're really ready to do this, or you need to go to therapy. We might not even know why they didn't accept us, or they might accept us but never place a child with us, because sometimes the system isn't real honest. We're afraid that therapists will reject us and go back to the social worker and say, oh, why did you ever place this child with this family? Who did this family assessment? We're afraid that judges will reject us when we go to finalize or when we go in for the various hearings of permanency. When we went into the judges' chambers for our adoption for the first two children that came home, they were toddlers and quite wild. And our son had some Hot Wheels. And he went up to the judge's desk and he started rolling them and digging them into his desk and so on and so forth. And I thought, the judge is going to say, no, these kids don't deserve to be adopted. I mean, where we were, and I was a social worker and I understood the system, but I was afraid the judge was going to say no, because our children were acting up in his chambers. That fear of rejection is pretty strong. We worry that the birth first family will reject us, particularly in these foster to adopt situations where they know us and we know them. And what could they be saying about us? And what could they say about us to the children? We worry that our children will reject us. And we don't think logically. We're not reasoning when we're dealing with issues of rejection. They're feelings. They live in our gut, in our heart, not in our thinking brain. Will our family and friends reject us or our children? Or will other children in the family, let's say there are already children in the home, and they go to their parents and say, I don't want them to stay. I don't like them. I don't like what they do. I want you to send them back. It's a complexity that many of our families have to confront. And I really wanted to share with you one of my favorite poems by Michael Trout in his wonderful The Hope-Filled Parent. Because I've had an experience like this, and I'll bet some of your families have had an experience like this. And it's called A Meltdown at Walmart. In 100 years, I don't think I'll ever forget or figure this out. Why today? Why over nothing? At least nothing I could see. Why a complete total in my face? Who is this child meltdown in aisle 3 at the good old Walmart? We had stopped for toilet paper. They had a deal and some magic markers for a project at her preschool. I told her we only had a few minutes and we couldn't dawdle. I didn't yell when she did dawdle at the Baby Wets a Lot display. I just said, come on, hon, gotta go. And that was the last thing I remember before my child flopped herself to the floor, screaming at the top of her 4-year-old lungs, flailing, wailing, legs and arms everywhere. It just wouldn't stop. I thought I was watching a crazy person, though soon I was feeling like the crazy person. Did they ever cover this in class at the agency? I meant to proceed to the toilet paper area. It would be dumb to leave without the thing I came for, wouldn't it? But then redirected myself to the door with nothing to show for my little errand but an enraged child barely contained in the arms of her bewildered and beleaguered parent. It was a relief to feel the outside air, and I thought to put her down, which is when she dashed away from me across the lot in front of several cars. By the time I tackled her, she'd added a new twist. Now she wasn't just making howling noises, she was crying out to the slowly gathering crowd, help me, this white guy is trying to kidnap me, call the police. Hands reached for cell phones, and it dawned on me, I'm in trouble here. This child has more power to win the hearts of these onlookers than I do. I look pleadingly at a man who is rushing towards us, but what do I say? How do I tell him that this little girl watched her first mommy shake her baby brother to death, that she then lost everyone she knew, and that she has moments when it all rushes back in her, and at those moments, I really am the enemy? Or should I get into the thing I just now, this very minute, thought of? There was a woman inside that store who looked eerily like the mommy my little girl hasn't seen in 2 years, the one who did not protect her, the one for whom she yearns even while she can barely remember her, the one she fears and wants all at the same time. Can I explain all of this to a confused and critical mob in the next few seconds before they really do call the police? Or do I just scoop up my precious child, find some way to strap her into the car seat before someone straps me into a squad car and drives off? If I manage to do this, how shall I bring calmness back to my soul? How do I not only forgive her, but love her even more deeply on this day that we both peered into the very depths of her despair? How do I remind myself that it's not about me? How do I hold her, the limp rag that she usually becomes after one of these meltdowns, and reassure her when I'm needing reassurance myself so badly? How do I clear my vision so that I can integrate that today did not come out of the blue the way it seemed, that it came out of a soul so injured that the body containing that soul could do nothing but flail and rage in a fight with smoke-like demons, and she can see, but I am required only to imagine. I am the parent of a child whom others hurt. I signed up They didn't tell me about days like today. But I do know what my job is. As the sweat begins to dry under my shirt and my embarrassment begins to drift away, I know that this little girl needs me. Indeed, that's what her behavior just told me, isn't it? That is an experience not uncommon for our families, to be embarrassed by the neighbors our children steal from, lie to, tell horrible stories about ourselves to, lies they tell at school. Like my son who had new glasses that darkened in the sun, who told his teachers that he was going blind and that's why he couldn't do his homework. And his parents were just too upset to talk to the school about it. We deal with those issues, the lies, the stealing, the meltdowns. I remember once telling a family, the next time that happens, lay down in the aisle in Walmart and kick your feet and scream and join that child in a temper tantrum. And they went, I'll get arrested. The child will stop. They'll look at you like, what are you doing? And you both get up and have a laugh. How do we join in the craziness? That's the work that we have to prepare families for. We're not healthy when we're dealing with rejection. We don't sleep. A lot of our families don't sleep, or they sleep too much. They can't wake up. But most of them are not sleeping, and their immune systems are being suppressed. They're getting sick more often, as are other members of the family. And they're very, very apt to lash out, to slam a door, to scream. For me, it was grabbing a child by her upper arms and leaving finger marks and having her go off to school and being reported to child abuse. That happens to us. And we have to be aware and help our families to talk about these deep emotional responses. And that brings us then to shame. Some of our families did have that outside-in emotion of shame put on them as children. Our children have been shamed. And some of our children do not yet have the attachment that allows them to have the development of a conscience. And so they don't learn well. They don't have cause and effect thinking, and that can frustrate parents. And then they begin to feel guilty. Our families carry a lot of shame and guilt from experiences like the meltdown at Walmart, of not knowing what to do or how to respond, of responding in a way they've never responded in before. We're judged by others, but we're judging ourselves. We may have felt all along that we could do this. They don't like who they've become. They may be judging their partner negatively, or their partner may be judging them. What kind of a mother does that? What kind of a father doesn't come home day after day and stays at the office such long hours? What have we done to the other children in the family? Boy, that social worker must think we're crazy. That social worker must feel that they made a terrible mistake. I'm not who I was before. And it does live in the mind and the body. And I know these are issues that Allison will also pick up on. And I just want to remind us that part of what we can do is to recognize that our uniqueness doesn't stem from our being an adoptive, foster, or kinship family. Our uniqueness comes from the individuals that we are and what we bring into the world. And we cannot lose sight of that. We cannot make all of our role definition about just that work that we're doing with children, or we'll lose our larger selves. And we need role models. We need successful adoptive, foster, and kinship families that are farther down the road and can give us advice about what worked, and who can read our thoughts and feelings and get it, hit it on the nail, and can give us respite because they understand how to parent our kids. And we need to cement deeply our connections, our support systems. We can't lose track of where we come from and how that's impacted us and our self-esteem. And we have to find a group. We have to find our peeps who are walking this journey. One of the greatest gifts for me in my role as an adoptive foster family member is the people that came into my life that were friends that become family. My family was one of the greatest gifts. All of this needs to be grieved. And it's hard when we're overwhelmed, we're sad. We don't have time. There's no time. Pretty scary to say to a social worker, I'm so sorry I did this. I'm crying myself to sleep every night. That's pretty scary. Our families need to feel free to share that journey with you and not be judged. It's a normal journey. After all, I chose this. Is it okay for me to be sad and mad? Yes. So getting through the grief process without feeling totally crazy and unhinged, not being alone, recognizing that all of us in the household are on a roller coaster ride and one kid gets settled and the other kid pops up. You know those games at carnivals? You knock one down and the next one comes up. And we're going to be surprised every day at what causes us to grieve. And we're going to find that nothing gets done. You know, I'm a neatnik. I like my house in order. Man, did I have to give that up. I had to give that up. I had to give up the idea of having a good meal on the table every night. Because sometimes I just had to order pizza and that's the best I could do. That's all I had left over for. And then who we are has changed. Who we are has changed. How we claim our role of not being the only. How others see us. School personnel, our partners, our religious institution, our neighbors. And each child we parent makes us feel different, gives us a different aspect of our identity. And how our partner sees us and our extended family sees us. Will they let us wrap ourselves in our new role? Or do they see this as temporary? This is only going to be one generation and then they're gone and we'll be back to our regular family chart. Our regular family chart. And boy, we see this in wills where our children by adoption don't get artifacts. They may get some money, but they don't get artifacts. They're not seen in the same way. And that's painful to us. Painful to us. Recognizing that we're a parent, but not the only mother or father. And again, how we self-describe and what words we ask other people to use to describe us becomes important here. Remember, identity is made up of all of these rich aspects of ourselves, and then we add some when we become adoptive, foster, and kinship parents. I'm going to slip through this. And if we lose ourself, our connections, our attachments, our good feelings, we may not be able to do the intimacy work with our children and stay intimate with our partners and those people who support us. How do you build intimacy before there's trust and attachment with a child? How do you find time for yourself and your partner in the new roles that you've undertaken? How do you continue to have deep communication when you're feeling angry at yourself? How do you reorient your priorities? And finally, how do you stay vulnerable? How do you stay resilient? Which is part of the work that we need to do to get to mastery and control. That's the goal, is learning a new way to live, subjugating habitual ways of doing things and finding new ways and new responsibilities and new responses. It takes time and energy and faith and support and resilience. It takes a sharing of control. It takes being able to ask for help, giving up control when we don't know how to do something. All of those things are part of getting to mastery, which includes self-awareness, taking time to really do a deep dive into the self, journaling, meditating, being in touch with your body. All of these things will help us. I'm going to stop here. I want to tell you what a joy it is to share this with you. And Allison, jump in, honey.
Okay, hi everyone. I need to do a screen share. So Sharon, you have to stop. Yes, look at that. Brilliant. Look how seamless we are. Sometimes it isn't so seamless. Can everybody see that right now? Is that a yes? Great.
Yeah, we can see it.
Great. Fabulous. So, oh, look at this. Now I have to fast forward, right? I'm so sorry. You guys are like, what are you doing, Allison? Very sorry. I'm looking for my, which I don't see right now, where my slideshow is. That is very interesting. So I'm going to scroll because that's what it's allowing me to do. Are you guys all with me? Am I making you dizzy right now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. This is where we are, right? So first of all, a big thank you to my teacher, my sage, my mentor, my friend, Sharon. So it's always a pleasure and an honor for me to do this with Sharon. And welcome to each and every one of you. We are so excited you all are here and blessed to have you all part of this team on the front lines of helping children and families heal. So I'm going to jump. Oh, actually, you know what? I can't do it this way because I can't get to my animations, which I do need.
I think it's because it's a PDF file and not the
Oh,
PowerPoint
you know
file.
what? Yes, I think you are correct. I think I picked up the wrong one. So brilliant. You are correct. You are correct. So hold with me just one sec, guys. I do apologize, but I will find the correct one because I do have it. Here. Perfect. All right. I got it. So thank you all for your patience. Yeah, see, now this looks normal to me. So yeah, very sorry about that, but now it's all looking like it should be looking. So I can manage the animation. Okay, and you all can see this now. Big thumbs
Yes.
up. Yes, yes, brilliant, brilliant. And Sharon and Michaela and Cindy can manage the chat room. I am going to really start with here. We sent you all some handouts and you guys should have the handouts. If I kind of first of all bring your attention to this handout, which looks like a grid. And all of what Sharon was just walking you through connected to the foster kinship adoptive parent experience is really what I'm going to be moving us through. But I always like us when we're looking at this handout to really, for me, see the the wisdom of the core issues and really creating this unifying lens, we've done a training specific to the core issues in our birth first parents and extended family. And now we're doing our foster kinship adoptive parents and their journey through the core issues. And we did our children. But when you look at, in fact, this slide in particular, one of the things is you can see the tremendous complexity that often our parents, our foster kinship and adoptive parents, are sandwiched in between tremendous complexity and also have their own core issues, as Sharon was saying. So when we focus on the losses that Sharon was just talking about, it's really important. And in fact, if you printed this handout, you can start walking through and identifying your own core issues as I move through them, which will really help you kind of activate the core issues framework and tools and techniques to be more therapeutic. So we really do want you to be able to personalize all of this. So when we talk about the losses, I have you think for our foster kinship and adoptive parents, and you'll find me kind of segmenting out because those are really three uniquely different experiences as they're related to the core issues. So often for traditional adopters that come forward to adopt because they couldn't conceive or make a baby, make a genetic child, that really they're coming forward with the loss of infertility, which is really a lifelong loss. They, in addition, could have losses of miscarriages, how many cycles of IVS, a whole journey that created a tremendous amount of loss and suffering and pain, and hence the loss of genetic connection to the child. It's really a different kind of parenting, as you were hearing Sharon talk about, that we're parenting a child in a non-normative way. So when we say non-normative, so that often the advice that our parents get from the families that are parenting that traditional way is not always helpful and useful. In fact, many of our parents go, it's kind of beyond frustrating to hear all the comparisons or the advice giving connected to what you should be doing when your child is having a meltdown at Walmart, right? Because they really aren't connected to the core issues and the losses and the trauma that our children have suffered through. And our kinship parents' losses, they lose familial roles. They're losing often the stage that they were in. Let's say they were in retirement in a non-parenting role. And now they're thrust back into an earlier stage of development where they're parenting toddlers. We see this happen all the time. And in our kin families, those families often weren't coming to this experience of parenting our children in the same way that our foster or adoptive parents were. Our foster and adoptive parents are often coming to us because they want to parent either through foster care or adoption. Our kin families usually get a crisis call, right? There's a phone call that they get with notice to come pick up their 3 grandchildren that are now in the foster care system, and you have 3 hours to pick them up. So it's a whole different set of losses that begin to unfold through their parenting journey. And our foster parents specifically, if they're more traditional foster parents that are doing more traditional foster parenting, they may lose child after child that they were attached to. So the losses of their roles with those children, and they may never see the outcomes of all the emotional investing and the attaching to those children. So there are ongoing losses. And often the demands in child welfare, those of you that are a professional in the field, we know the demands connected to how many children are waiting for homes. So we're often, when there's a space that frees up in the home, like, oh, can I give you 3 more kids next week? Often leaving families without the space to grieve and adjust to the loss that they just experienced. So we have to be really sensitive to not overtaxing the greatest kind of asset in the child welfare system, which are our families that we're serving, that really carry the emotional burden. Because while many of us go to work and this is our job, it's our families that live the experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every month, every year. They're living it, sleeping it, eating it, waking up to it. Whereas professionals get to go to work and go home. It's a very different experience. And when we say losses, this is where kind of the rubber meets the road. I want us to kind of always be thinking as I'm moving forward about these three distinct areas, because it's often where as us as professionals, when we're serving our parents, thinking about how the human mind, the adult mind, the story we tell ourselves, we have a cognitive process, a belief system. How am I explaining all these losses to myself? I'm always listening really deeply to how someone's narrating their story. If they're a foster parent, a kin parent, an adoptive parent, how are they understanding their losses, explaining their losses? Because that's often coming out of them. So I want to be listening to that narrative process. Now there's an affect, a feeling state. So think about the heart. What feelings and emotions, as you heard Sharon talking about? What are all the feelings and complex emotions that get unpacked? Not in my pre-service training. This is where pre-service training is very different than when a child lands on Allison's attachment dance floor. That's when everything shows up and hits the fan. Because now it's in my heart, it's in my emotional system. It's not up here in a theory or in a thought or a fantasy about what this child might be like or what I might be like as parent. Now this is where the rubber meets the road and my heart or my emotional system is activated. So it's when all the feelings on the dance floor get triggered. And this is often, the first year in particular is often that crisis year for not just the child, but for the parent, because it's the parent that has to adapt to all of the emotional demands that are being placed on them. And by the way, not just from the child, who else is putting demands on our parents? Those of you that are professional, raise your hand. Like, oh, I think that's us. Professionals. It's social workers, the court system, judges, attorneys, therapists. How many meetings and appointments and demands and paperwork and the significant incident report. And oftentimes our parents are like, can I just parent the child and not have all of the system demands? So I want us to be thinking, especially as a professional, about all the demands we put on the mind and the heart and the body-based sensory system of our parents. Woo. So I want to start with, when I say loss, and I'm going to read a poem written by a foster parent, really about kind of the loss and the process. And for me, this is really a gem of a poem because it really hits to the heart of one of our greatest or the greatest resource, our foster parents, which include our kin parents, our potential adoptive parents. This poem written by a foster parent is called Love Takes Time to Grow. The child says, I love you. Oh, my child, how could you love me? We just met. Child, you don't love me? No, child, though I'm fond of you, love takes time to grow. It takes patience, honesty, trust. Will you give me away like all the others did? Does that scare you? It scares me too. It does? Yes, child. I'm afraid that we won't get along. I am afraid I won't know what to say or do. But most of all, I'm afraid that you'll want to go away. What if I end up loving you and you still don't love me? Do you know what real love is, my child? I think so. It's when you want to stay with someone and never leave. Well, that's true, but it's so much more. It's when you trust someone with your very life. It's when you'll do anything to bring happiness to them. It's when you know you can say anything, do anything, feel anything, and know the one you love will always love you no matter what. It's when you feel that you are a part of them that could never be torn apart. And the way that you know, and the way that you will know that love has been found, is when you feel a glorious feeling that can only come from within, that makes you want to laugh and cry at the same time, and makes you feel as if you want to hold on tight and never let go. The child, will I feel safe then? Yes, my child, you will feel safe then. Child, how do we make love grow? You must be yourself, and I'll be mine. And if we are sad, then we'll cry together. And if we're mad, then we'll talk it out. And if we're afraid, we'll comfort each other. But best of all, when we're happy, we'll laugh together. And in time, we will learn to know each other, trust each other, and love each other. Child, I hope that love will grow. New parent, me too, my child, me too. So when we talk about these losses as connected to foster parenting, kinship parenting, and adoptive parenting, Sharon beautifully gave some examples of all of the various kinds of losses that are connected to the core loss of parenting differently in this culture. The vicarious losses connected to this experience for parents are when the child actually shows up on my attachment dance floor and the child begins to unpack all of their relational trauma. It's not just trauma, we say relational trauma or attachment-based trauma, because that's when actually as the parent, attachment style and pattern gets activated and triggered. So it's also when my losses show up. So when I'm trying to attach, and there are these barriers because the child has had potentially so many disruptions that they oppose attaching, they defy attaching. You know, that horrible diagnosis of oppositional defiant disorder, which is really an attachment impairment. The child opposes attaching because for our children, most of the time, attachment brought pain and suffering and loss and grief and pain. So as the child's opposing attaching to me, all my vicarious losses are showing up. And many of these, by the way, are quite ambiguous because they're often ambiguous losses are an injury, suffering, a wound with no closure. That while I, as the new parent, could be celebrating the child I'm parenting right now, like, yay, I'm finally parenting, I'm also missing the child that I could have had genetically, or the child I would have birthed and not have had suffer through so much. And these might not be things I even share or talk about. And these are often, by the way, our ambiguous losses are embedded and encoded very deeply within our sensory system. I often may not even understand these myself internally until the child shows up and I really see myself getting triggered in ways I could have never imagined. And those secondary losses, as you heard Sharon talking about, are the losses that sprout from the core loss. Oh, I should, yeah, no, go this way, the core loss. But they show up in the day-to-day life in my parenting. When I go to fill out the medical form and I don't know any of the information, or people ask me, or my mom asks me about the child and why they might be doing certain things and I have no idea. Or the child seems like they might be making up stories, but I don't even know because I don't know my child's history. Or I wasn't there for my child's backstory when they were 1 year old, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't really know my child's history. I know what I've read on a piece of paper, but I don't know my child's experience of their history, their story. That comes out in all, often the child making up or filling in the blanks of their story, because traumatic memories connected to traumatic losses create episodic memory, memory fragments, and the child is often trying to narrate some of that and could be filling it in with things that aren't always accurate. Nothing more complex than human memory as it's connected to early loss and trauma. For our parents, how would they know all of this? Because as they move along their journey, so think about that first train in their journey as being, they're sitting in a home study class, like, oh, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm not parenting a child with loss or trauma. It's actually as they move through that journey and begin their parenting experience that many of these losses then become activated, as you heard Sharon talk about. One of the main losses for our parents is connected to attachment. And this becomes really important. We have to always be talking about attachment, because all of our child's losses are connected to their attachment history and all that they lost. And for our children, it's not always just that they lost the first maternal familial tree and the paternal familial tree, but how many attachment disruptions. They might have lived with grandmother for a while, with an auntie for a while, with 2 different foster homes for a while. That's attachment disruption. Those are all secondary relationships if nobody stayed in the primary role. You guys see the primary is at the top. The primary attachment role is the claiming of the child's needs. It isn't, quote, just this thing called love. In fact, I always like to differentiate between attachment and love. That attachment is much more complex for our parents in particular. So for our foster, adoptive, and kin parents, they're claiming this child. So as you watch these different issues drop into the screen, from what might have been a toxic in utero experience, the child being exposed prenatally to drugs or alcohol or substances, and their mother's toxic stress if she was in a violent relationship, the genetic issues, as you heard Sharon talking about, being predisposed to the legacy ancestry of my genetic parents, and the multiple traumas potentially at birth or the first year or 2 years of life, which are really critical for brain development. We've learned so much from neuroscience that what the new parents are now claiming is this, and it's a commitment to not just, quote, love the child, but commit to the healing of the child, which is much more complex. And often this is what our parents are in the trenches learning and growing through their journey. So our parents' attachment style and pattern is really critical. And for our parents that had the benefit of having their attachment needs met as children, they typically grow into parenting, having a lot more of the emotional skills and abilities to attune with the nonverbal needs and cues of a child with high trauma, versus a parent that might have had a lot of their own attachment trauma as a child, and especially sensitive to those parents that may have suffered a lot of toxic stress as a child. That often that gets unpacked as the child shows up on my, quote, attachment dance floor as the parent, and is now putting emotional demands on me. And the reason attachment becomes so important, as you can see here, is because of all of the secondary gains. That attachment isn't just about meeting the child's needs for safety. It's also about activating all of the child's potential. So think about from their body-based sensory system, their emotional development, their social development, their cognitive development, their conscience development. We spent more time in this in the 7 core issues for the child, teen, and adult adoptee. But I always want to especially remind our professionals that with us that the work of attachment for the new parent, that let's say the child that lands on my dance floor chronologically is 6 years old, that tells long that child's been on the planet. They've been on the planet for 6 years. It tells me little to nothing about their developmental needs and their attachment history. That's what's going to put the demands on my dance floor, because I could be having a child whose year 1 developmental needs weren't met, their attachment needs weren't met, and now they don't modulate and regulate their affect very well. They go into rage and meltdowns very quickly, and they no longer trust human connections 101. So what they need the most could also be what they fear the most, that brings them the most terror, the most pain, the most distress. So all these areas can get maximized when our parents can create a secure attachment relationship. So when you hear Allison say the work of attachment, this is what we're talking about. In our book that we were referencing earlier, we have a whole section connected to how parents can become much more aware of their own losses, connected to the core issue and their unique parenting experience. And you'll hear me talk a little bit in a bit about some of the activities that we structured in our new workbook, which is not published yet. It comes out next year, but I'll be giving you a little front loading, a little teaser around some of the activities that really are built specifically for foster, adoptive, and kinship parents. Rejection. Why rejection? Why is rejection such a big, massive issue? Of course, connected to attachment. So when we think about how rejection shows up, it can show up in our mind by the thoughts we're saying. Will this child reject me? Will the system reject me? As you heard Sharon saying, I have to go through a home study and be approved. Will my own family reject me because of the potential child I bring into this family? Will the child's birth first family reject me? Will the culture reject me? How am I seen in the broader culture based on how I'm parenting or the children I'm parenting? So the rejection shows up in a lot of different ways. And remember, in our grid, our parents are sitting smack in the middle of the other 2 sets of core issues of constellation members. So if the child rejects me, which by the way, when I just talked about the child having the fear of attachment, that's how it shows up. You're not my mom. You're not my real dad. I want to go back to my mommy. I hate you. I don't have to listen to you. You're not my real mother. Yes, that's all how it shows up. How the parent manages their triggers in those moments is what I'm talking about with the mind, the heart, emotion, and my body-based sensory system. So then it's not about my child, then it's about me as the parent. It's often why the best supportive services are ones that wrap the family. We cannot just provide resources for this child over here because the client needs to be the family system, the attachment relationships that are healing the child, right? Does that make sense to everybody? That's so critical, and we're still not there. Every time I hear, wait, we're still taking the child into somebody's office and the parents are in the waiting room, then the client is not the attachment relationship. Will the system reject me? Will my family reject me? Does this child, or will this child eventually see me as their parent, or have a lot of confusion about that? Does the broader society, when I go to school, when I go to church, when I go into my community or my neighborhood, does my own family see me as the real parent? So rejection shows up in all kinds of interesting, unfortunate ways. And if the parent has their own ACEs, so think of our foster kinship adoptive families, that if from childhood, I might have a more toxic belief system about myself, if I have any self-loathing, or if I've internalized a critical parent, we often might hear things from our parents like, this child's not going to disrespect me. I wasn't allowed to disrespect my parents. This child's not allowed to cuss at me. I couldn't cuss at, boy, my parents would hit me if I did. What we're hearing is a belief system connected to how that parent was parented And so when we're a child, we are experiencing the attachment dance as the child. So all of that is input and embedded and encoded within our limbic structures and our body-based sensory system. Then when we grow up, we're the parent, and guess what's coming out? What's been embedded and encoded within. So it's often affect and emotion, intense feelings that get triggered when I feel this child is not doing what I want them to do, or is disrespecting me, which is not really what the child's trying to do. We have a child of high trauma, right? That's really kind of unpacking their trauma on my dance floor. But these are the things that can get triggered within me. So one of the first things I love for our foster, kinship, and adoptive parents to know is what their own ACEs score is. This is a great and useful tool because we are literally through ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, redefining childhood trauma to now include attachment. And I'll explain that really quickly just so we see and understand the real important dynamic that attachment is and always will be. That if as a child, my attachment caregiving system was toxic, which could be neglect. My mother was an alcoholic and my father was in prison my whole childhood. I now may have two parents that were not securely attached to me, maximizing all of my developmental needs. So now I at least have two ACEs, that's two ACEs right there, that impacts every stage of my development. So when I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, every stage of development. And when I say development, don't just think of kind of one aspect of development. Think my emotional development, my cognitive development, my physiological, my body-based ability to regulate, self-regulate, my conscious development. If I didn't get enough empathy in to my childhood challenges, distress, trauma or neglect, etc., those parts of me may stay unhealed. So knowing about our own ACEs really empowers us to know what our needs are, connected to why we might be so triggered, connected to what our child's unpacking emotionally on our dance floor. And I'll just kind of anchor us back to, before I leave rejection, that this is a very complex dynamic for our foster and kinship and adoptive parents on their dance floor. Because for our adoptive parents that longed to parent, for instance, like we always say that becoming an adoptive parent can cure parentlessness. You can become a parent, but it never cures infertility. So when I finally, quote, get what I wanted the most, I want to be a parent, I want to be a mom, or I want to be a dad, that doesn't make all of my infertility, losses, grief, pain, suffering go away. In fact, new issues surface as I'm understanding sometimes how different it feels to parent this child. And the culture or the feedback I'm getting sometimes from other people is how sad you couldn't have one of your own, or what happened to your own children, or why aren't they with their real parents, which takes me back often to my own losses. So shame and guilt. And shame and guilt for our foster, adoptive, kinship parents show up in very different ways throughout this journey of our parenting experience. What's the difference between guilt and shame? And I really want to kind of emphasize the differences because they show up in different ways connected to our parents' ability to claim their children often, feel entitled to be the parent. If they themselves feel some internalized shame, maybe I'm bad, maybe I'm worthless, maybe I'm broken, that's something about me. So if the infertility experience has made me feel this way about myself, there's something wrong with me, there's something broken or damaged to the core, that I'm being punished, that maybe God didn't want me to be a parent, or I'm being punished for having the abortion that I had. Often these very internal thoughts that one has that can bring them more shame can make a parent feel more insecure in their parenting role with their child. The difference here with guilt, and there is what we call healthy guilt and unhealthy guilt. There is healthy guilt. We shouldn't steal from, like I stole a lollipop from when I was 6 years old. I should have felt guilty for that. My parents helped me feel guilty for that. I had to take the lollipop back to the store. It's called healthy guilt. But there is unhealthy guilt, where we hammer someone for a mistake over and over and over again, that can move a child or a person into feeling a lot of toxic stress. Mistakes aren't okay. And we really need to undo those pieces, both for our parents and for our children. That healthy guilt is really okay, but unhealthy guilt that makes me feel less than, or something's wrong with me, or I don't know what I'm doing, that all, when it moves into shame, impacts self-esteem and self-worth. So guilt is often more about behavior, but shame is about me, that there's something wrong with me. And I'll connect this to the parenting for our adoptive, fostering, kinship parenting. So for our parents, remember Sharon brought you into this image here, which is actually kind of the beginning of our book, because we really want all of our constellation members to always see the connection between attachment and trauma, and the core issues are always kind of in play, if you will. If a parent, whether it's a kinship parent, like maybe I don't deserve to parent again, I didn't do it well the first time, and they're going to give me more kids and I'm going to mess it up again. And these may be thoughts they never share. It's actually why having kinship-focused support groups and kin-focused resources are so important, because our kin parents don't feel the same as foster parents. They have a very different experience, because all of those traumatic experiences are on their family tree. They're all on the branches of my tree, right? Or the other birth first family tree. So there's a very intimate emotional connection to all of these relationships. The parent that internalizes, maybe I am a bad parent, can feel like I'm not supposed to be a parent. Am I being punished? Is the child punishing me? Like, why does my child wake up angry every morning, enraged every morning? Why am I the target of all their rage and pain and suffering? And if they are, let's say they're a mom, a new mom for this child, and the child had 6 different moms, you are the next mom in a row of many moms, and the child already is coming into this experience with an active attachment pattern. They have attached and then suffered more loss, more grief, more pain. So you are on the front lines of healing a whole history experientially that's been embedded in their body, in their heart, in their limbic systems, and in their brains. So they often do have a belief system, like, why did all this happen? And you're just going to throw me away like a piece of trash like everybody else did. That's often how our kids will talk about that experience. So how our parents respond emotionally, show up for their own kind of healing and growth and replenishment, because this can be a really emotionally depleting experience for our parents. How are they replenishing? There can be the shame of infertility, that maybe I am being punished, that this is a curse. And maybe I pushed my luck too far and did a home study and got kids. And as this child keeps reminding me potentially that I'm not good enough to parent, that I don't know what I'm doing. And I am making mistakes. I might be saying things and doing things I regret, right? I might be yelling at the child. I might be saying, listen, call your social worker. And we see our parents that maybe in the first few weeks or months really could be at their wits' end and might say things. How do we help our parents recover from those normative parenting mistakes, find self-forgiveness, and go through a process of not beating themselves up with unhealthy guilt around normative parenting mistakes? Our kin parents may carry more shame of their own past mistakes, that maybe I was an alcoholic when I was raising my children, and am I paying the price for what I did or didn't do with my child, who then grew up and couldn't parent the child that they created? This is all my fault. I feel a tremendous amount of toxic guilt and shame. And I may never share this, especially if you put me in a room with either foster parents or adoptive parents that maybe wouldn't understand how this feels to me. It's why kin first services and specialized kin services are so important. We have a whole chapter in our book around the core issues and our kin families. So, because I don't want to run out of time, and I am going to run out of time, I have to pick up my pace just a little bit. The shame and guilt for our parents, acknowledging the darker feelings. We as a community of professionals have to allow our parents, our foster, kinship, and adoptive parents to acknowledge their deepest, darkest fears, feelings, thoughts, unpack that. We have to make that all okay, which is why support groups are so critical. In fact, those of you that saw Instant Family and may know I was the consultant on the movie Instant Family. The reason we put our support groups in that movie 3 different times, did you guys see that? 3 different times. There's a reason we did that, all connected to the core issues and the journey that families go through. What you saw in those scenes in the movie was families feeling a sense of kinship with each other. I can say anything in this room and you're not going to judge me. You're not going to say I'm full of crap or you asked for this, or in fact, you're going to invite my deepest, darkest fears and feelings into this process and validate them. So then I can go home and be the best parent I can be. But I need to be with my peeps, sometimes even more than, quote, therapizing me or putting me with a therapist that doesn't know about the core issues, attachment and trauma, or a therapist that just sees my kiddo and then makes me the bad guy because they might be buying into everything my kiddo is saying about how I'm an evil, wicked witch, et cetera, which happens all the time. If the clinician doesn't have a family attachment systems, clinical orientation, which is why that becomes really important. So one of the activities we put in our workbook, and this is just a little teaser to help us see how we could help parents. Shame lives in our limbic structures. You guys see the blue region there? Shame that's been embedded and encoded lives deeper. It lives underneath our logic processes. Like logical processes are in our prefrontal cortex. That is not where shame lives. Shame lives more deeply. So when it shows up and gets activated, we have to retrain our deeper brain-based systems to move into radical acceptance, to de-shame our own interior. And by the way, if our parents can't do this, this is what Sharon was referring to earlier, that our kids can only get as far as our parents. So while yes, our kids generally need this too, our parents often need this too. Many of us were raised with a lot of critical parenting, right? So many of us have a very critical interior. We're chronically judging ourselves. And would that help us be more emotionally available and attuned to our children? It typically does not. Grief, and this is where the work is. The challenge for professionals and even parents, I want you to see this train as the parent in the beginning of their journey, like they're showing up in your classes. Now they don't really know what this experience is going to be like emotionally. Think about the brain again, the blue structure, because their attachment system hasn't been activated. That happens when the child lands on the dance floor. So we can do as much pre-service, wonderful training, la, la, la. But when the rubber meets the road is when our parents most need specialized therapeutic support services that meet them where they are. And it's different for each parent. So when we have the right kind of therapeutic support, we're meeting and joining with our parents with what they need. Sometimes what happens is we meet our parents and we tell them what the child needs. And the parent's like, well, that's nice for the child, but is anyone helping me with my triggers and what's happening with me and giving me a space and a place to unpack what I need to work through, not just about the child. So how complicated? grieving the loss of my genetic connection to my child, the mirroring, all of which is really complex and doesn't happen prior to the child landing there. Even if I'm like, oh no, I grieve the loss and I'm all done. That's not how it is experienced for the parent and the child. It's when the child is saying to me, you're not my real mother and you don't look like me. And we go to a restaurant and everybody's staring at me and we're getting comments and looks and my child's feeling insecure and I might be feeling insecure. This is where the grief shows up. And grief, as we know, is messy, messy, and more messy. It's never linear. It's never clean. And it can show up with me sounding like this. You better answer this phone right now. I've called you 3 times, social worker therapist. It may show up with a lot of dysregulation and agitation and demanding behaviors, which is why having resources, and I have a great support group for you, and please come in. And right now, what's your greatest concern? Because I'm going to do some deep listening and meet you where you are. And that's what our parents most need. Because in the moment, we're going to hit the tip of the iceberg, but we need to go deeper and deeper into what our parents most need. Because the parallel process is that's what we want them to be doing with their child, right? Because we can't expect our parents to know what to do if we're not moving into this relational attachment dance with them, where we as the support system becomes the secure base and the safe haven for the families that we're building. And these families come to us and we're helping to build and create them. And then what we have to do is show up with the supportive services to wrap them with what they need. And that is not just about the child. And what happens when our family, and I love, by the way, this visual from Tear Soup, what happens if our parents, our kinship foster adoptive parents, start to feel this is more than I can bear? I think I'm going to go crazy, unhinged. I'm losing my shit right now, if I'm allowed to say that. And that is how it feels. By the way, we put this scene in Instant Family also. Remember the scene on the bed where the 2 foster parents are going, how do we give them back? How do we get rid of them? And the tendency is to think that's about the kids, right? When the reality is what? That's about me. I'm having to adapt. I'm having to adjust to kids' needs, trauma, the system, the paperwork, the court dates, the therapy, oh my gosh, I'm drowning. This may feel like it's more than I can bear. So how we join with them to help assist with that adaptation process, that growth learning process is absolutely critical. If we don't adapt as professionals and as a whole kind of service delivery system and community, we lose families and we lose really good families. This is how disruptions occur. We have many great big-hearted families that we can lose if we're not stewarding and supporting the family system's growth process and our parents. So often what it sounds and feels like for the parent in their interior is, I asked for this, right? I didn't know I would feel so triggered all the time. It sounds like this, and I'm overwhelmed, and in crisis. Now, this is not the point to just throw in the towel and say, okay, then let's give up. This is the time to support our families with what they need the most. And that's for us to be willing to join them with the right kind of specialized therapeutic support that they need. Identity. All the things that Sharon talked about earlier, I'm going to specifically go into one aspect of identity, but here for our parents, it's kind of the most important piece in the beginning. My parental identity. I'm becoming a parent. So the tendency is to think, again, this is just about the child. But when that child lands on my dance floor, I become a mom. I become a dad to this specific child. So claiming my own parental identity, you would think, oh, that's relatively easy. No. Because there are other parents involved, including the system and judges and social workers that tell me, can I get a haircut? What can I do? What can I not do? Oh, you have to do this. You have to do this. that can feel very disempowering for me, and a lot of role confusion for the child who maybe has had 6 different moms before me. So very confused about who's this next person and how long are you my mom before you get rid of me too. So my ability to fully claim this role, claiming my parental role, and by the way, this is an activity in our workbook, is very complex. Who's the real parent? And by the way, like Sharon said, we're all real parents, but each has a different, quote, lane on the freeway. So while our foster, kinship, and adoptive parents are the parenting parent, the everyday parent, what I call the attachment parents, they're doing the work of attachment, they are not and will never be the birth first parent, the birth first mother, the birth first father. There's a whole familial tree, and I'm not in that lane. And by the way, children, and this is what's often complex and can be confusing for both parent and children, these are where the new tasks come into play for our parents. Our parents have to be able to help the child developmentally understand their whole story. What happened, why it happened, how it happened, have access to the facts of the story, the truth of the story, real relationships when possible, even if those relationships can't be to the birth first mother or the birth first father. There's grandparents and siblings and extended family. Having access to those trees are a part of those additional tasks that our parents have. So claiming this parental identity as a foster, adoptive, or kinship parent is more complex for our parents, and they often need parental professional assistance from professionals that are adoption and permanency competent, trauma-informed and adoption and permanency competent. So just kind of as a teaser, this is what the chapter in our book looks like. So each of these, by the way, is an activity, very visual, very right hemispheric, because remember, it's not just about my thinking brain, it's about my feeling heart and my sensory system as a parent. So when we're exploring identity and helping parents claim their parental role, because that's really important. It's hard for a child to feel secure with their parent if the parent doesn't feel secure in their parenting role with the child. So helping the parent move through these activities helps them to explore their own internal, sometimes insecurities. Because by the way, how do our parents know all this? It's such empathy for our parents. Like Sharon was saying, you can't know what you didn't know. So I wish I would have known this way back when, but our parents can't be expected to know everything. Such empathy and gratitude for our parents. So I'm sorry, I don't want to skip this too quickly, but I see I'm bumping up against the clock. Identity impacts intimacy. If I, as the parent, feel insecure with my role, intimacy and identity are two sides of the same coin. When I feel insecure, it's hard for me to get emotionally close, to be intimate. So for our parents now, the physical and emotional demands of really claiming this role. Wait, I have to wake up with this child who might be yelling and screaming and having meltdowns before we even get to school. And then when he comes home, the fights around homework and bedtime, and he doesn't even go to sleep. He's like pacing and, sneaking food and doing all kinds of things that feel really overwhelming for me. It's all of these new emotional demands that show up during the work of attachment that can feel really discombobulating for the parent. And it's why they might be calling you for resources and support. And our families and parents might look really different in the home study. Like you go back to the home study and go, wow, where's that family? 2 years down the road when they're looking much more taxed and overwhelmed. The workbook activity that we put in looks like this. So let's say you have two parents that moved from parentlessness, like they didn't have kids. So all of their emotional energy and resources go to each other. It goes to the relationship. So all of the loving kind of rituals, connections, and see this arrow as energy. All of their loving energy goes towards one another. So what do you think happens when we add 3 kids to the intimacy of this dyad? So this is before, and now what we're going to see is the after. So all of the emotional energy and resources around intimacy and attachment are going to children. What do you think could happen to the intimacy of the dyad over time? This is where we see divorced couples, right? We see lots of stress between couples that might be parenting very differently, that have very different belief systems and histories and styles of attaching. So this activity is really useful for parents to just look at their own coupling relationship and where the intimacy might be challenged. The other thing we're asking this couple to do is do what we call non-traditional parenting. So traditional parenting that's built for, by the way, we've done 80,000 years, for kids that don't have trauma, that are born to the parents that raise them, that really can use, after they've attached for 2 years, more traditional forms of punishment, loss, taking things away, traditional parenting. Our parents who aren't attached, they might be getting a 6-year-old child who they're not attached to, yet we have to move into disciplining and socializing the child. They have to be attaching and disciplining, socializing the child at the same time. This is very different than what traditional parents have to do. These are extra learning skills that our parents need and not easily attainable while you're in the trenches with 3 kids that just landed on your dance floor. Can take years really to master. Oh my gosh, and look, I just set up mastery and control. So mastery and control, if you guys hold up your hands, I want you to see control on one end and mastery on the other, like a continuum. And all of these core issues that we just circled through for parents, when there is a lack of mastery around all of these issues, we often do more around fighting for control. So all the unnamed, unacknowledged, ungrieved losses that I have, if I'm a kin family, I can really be fighting all the time for control. It can show up with the child. Oh, you will do what I say. I'm fighting you for control. You need to listen to me. You will respect me. I'm fighting for control because I might feel out of control. Power and control issues show up all the time in the parent-child dynamic, and they also show up with us, right? Where that parent might be fighting us for control. I'm sick of you telling me I can't get their hair cut, or I'm sick of filling out these forms. They're going to be fighting really to be the parent because they want to have more control. And there are all these barriers for our parents generally around getting to mastery. Mastery around adoption and permanency for parents is a process that requires a lot of adapting. Like, I never thought this would be as hard as it is emotionally, as draining. I never thought I could feel the feelings that I'm feeling. In order to get to that resiliency, to that learning, to that self-awareness, and to forgiveness is a process, growth process. So for our parents, and Sharon did this earlier, that feel really out of control, like I'm in a car and I don't feel like I'm driving. I feel like you're driving it, or the judge, or the system, or the I'm in the car and I don't get to drive where it goes. Those are all losses of power and control for me. Getting to mastery. What would mastery feel like as a parent, an adoptive parent? That I might have a halo effect, that I think I have to be perfect. Allowing myself to be forgiving of myself, allow myself to make 10 mistakes every day, to learn through this growth process, to find other parents who've worked through these issues that can support and mentor me so I don't feel like I'm crazy or nobody understands. That to master when I get to this place of mastery, I'm feeling more successful, more replenished, I'm taking better care of myself, I'm nurturing myself. I have less of a need to fight for control all the time. And when we feel better on the inside, we start to do better. And that's true of our kids, and it's true of our parents. So this is what the mastery and control chapter looks like. By the way, this was really a fun chapter for Sh and I to do together. Each of these, and I highlighted a few just because you could see that we've built the workbook to be different than our regular book that we wrote that's 450 pages of content. We wrote the workbook to be experientially based, to be very parent friendly, to speak to them, to give them opportunities to explore their interior, their thoughts, their feelings, the things that are challenges for them. So helping them learn these additional skills and tools, like what are the 10 things my child needs to be as a person, as a soul, as a being, that I don't get stuck on seeing them through the lens of trauma. So I did a little bit rushed at the end because we were just bumping up against the clock. So my hope is, and I'd like to just close very quickly with my favorite poem and then open it up for questions, if that's okay. This is a poem. It's one of my favorites because it's written by an adoptive mom who adopted from foster care. And you can hear the core issues in every sentence and how she kind of got to mastery. It's one of my favorite poems around mastery. It's called A Letter to My Adopted Son on Having to Share You. To my son, the other day you told me that sometimes you want to be unadopted. It broke my heart, but I didn't let you know. I'm glad you know you can come to me with these things, and I hope you always do. You are my child. I know your hurts and thoughts, even when they're not spoken aloud, and I will always try to hold them with gentle understanding. Of course, there are times that you wish to be unadopted, undifferent, unscared, unlonely, to undo the dark days and be unseparated from the family, friends, and neighborhood you left behind, unmissing the mother that first owned your heart. You are sweet and wonderful and undeserving of any pain. I want it all undone for you too. It's not always easy for me to share you with her. Sometimes I feel surprised, mad, sad, and scared by how attached you still are to her. And I confess that I've counted the years that you've been with me versus with her, and wondered why the love and longing scales continue to tip so deeply in her favor. I imagine that sometimes you feel that way too. And the truth is that I will never be able to fill the space that she occupies. And while I may be jealous of the way your heart still speaks to hers, I'm glad that I'm not the missing whole. One of the hardest things to reconcile in my heart is the fact that my greatest gift was your greatest heartbreak. To me, adoption is a miracle. It's fate solidified, an act of God. To you, adoption is separation, differentness, a missing piece. Don't get me wrong, you celebrated as much as anyone on that special day, even telling the judge, I've waited a long time for this, before the gavel was struck down. You're glad to be adopted by us, but really, you wish you didn't need to be adopted at all. There is pain and heartbreak that comes with being your adoptive mom, but I do not believe it rivals the pain you feel or the pain your first mother feels. So I will accept the gift of humility that comes with the gift of you and allow myself to speak the truths that you need to hear. Your mom is beautiful. She is smart. She's loving. She's special. It's okay to miss her. It's okay to love her more. She loves you too. I'll close my letter to you and the mantra that we share. The words that I have whispered into your ear thousands of times over the past 4 years. You're safe. You're loved. Everything will be okay. With love and respect, your mommy. Thank you so much for sharing this time and space with us. And we're happy to stay on for a few minutes and answer any of your questions connected to anything we shared around the core issue.
Thank you, Allison. Oh, somebody hearing an echo. Okay, anyways, if you have any questions, please stick around. Feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute you, or if you want to post them in your chat. Otherwise, thank you for joining us. Again, please fill out the survey when you exit and you will receive your participation certificate. And we hope that you will join us for our next training. It's the last one of this series. And again, it's going to be with Sharon, and then we have a new person joining us as well. And that's on November 17th, same time. So please make sure you register for our last training session, and let us know if you have any feedback or any questions for Sharon that pop in your head. I know every time I have a training, I start to think of questions. The next day, something comes up and I think of it. So please feel free to reach out even after this training. We're always here to help you find the information that you're looking for. All right. I don't see any questions in the chat. Just so much gratitude.
Lots of thank yous.
We thank you too.
Yes, and I also added a link to the handouts if you didn't get them. They're on, I'm gonna just go ahead and paste it again just to make sure everyone has it.
That Walmart story is in the Michael Trout piece that Michaela was nice enough to put a connection to on in the chat room.
I noticed that the Michael Trout piece is it's a recording, not a book. So I thought that was interesting.
It's both.
It's both?
Yeah, it's a CD and a booklet. And so you can either play it for a family, or it has the booklet that you can use.
Beautiful. Okay.
And Danya asked about the survey. The survey will automatically pop up after you exit out of this training. So as soon as you exit your screen, it'll come up automatically. Is there a way of being informed of when the new workbook release date will be?
That's like the $1 million question right now. What are your thoughts about that? Like, we don't know exactly when. We're doing edits right now, publisher, but it should be, our hope is next year, maybe spring of next year. Our publisher is Jessica Kingsley Publishing, and you can always check online, and they have a, what is it, Sharon, like a workbook or a, like their book of all their new releases, and it will be in there.
The other thing is, I'm sure Allison and I will both post it on our websites. So if you look at our websites, you'll be able to see that it's out there, because we will certainly post that it's now available.
And maybe when the workbook comes out, we can do a training relating to the workbook.
Oh, that would be fun. That might make me come back with Allison.
Ah, well, then we must do. But
I'm retiring, just so people understand what that means. I'm retiring at the end of the year. So, but for that, I might come back.
We have to do it now.
So somebody raised their hand.
Oh, I think it might have been an accident.
Thank you.
Yes, same. But using the workbook in support groups would be so helpful.
That is really our hope, by the way, that the workbook is actually a part of, it can go into any support group and you open a page and you're like, whoa, let's do this one. Like, it just kind of activates everything, not just kind of top down, like theoretically, but it really helps us dig into our own experiential interior to open up dialogue and self-awareness in a different way. So that's really our hope. So thanks, Jill. Oh, it's Jill. Hi, Jill. I know Jill. I didn't know that question came from Jill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, will the workbook include support group material for youth groups, children's groups?
So Cindy, that's the second workbook that will be created. We're in process right now. We're doing a 7 core issues workbook for the child and teen. It'll be one book, but the first
Okay.
section is really for our latency age kids, and then for the teens, but all around the core issues. So that one's not done yet, but that's a goal.
Great. Okay.
And I was going to say that I wish, as an adoptive parent and a foster parent, that somebody would have brought up at an information meeting at the agency that there was something that I could use even before I became part of the system. I'm hoping not only is it used in support groups, I'm hoping that people will have access to it and learn about it when they come in for an information meeting. And you could say, if you really want to get ready and know you're ready for this, I would recommend that you get this book and start
Yep.
working on your core issues now, so that you've got better prepared people coming in the first place.
I think that's a
Yeah.
brilliant idea.
Yeah. And I think I like what you're saying about it connects you to your emotion, not just keeping it up here in the heady space. Because I think in our support groups, even as soon as one person connects to that, then it opens the door for everyone else to connect to it as well. And I just love that. Like, it brings me back to when you were talking about instant family and they were laying in the bed having that moment. That's a moment that I've experienced myself. And you don't hear it enough, and people aren't honest about that. And it's just so helpful to have just a tool to be able to do that. So I'm excited for the workbook.
Or we.
All right, so if we don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and let everyone enjoy the rest of their day. Thank you all again for joining us, and please check out the book, The 7 Core Issues, as well as the recordings from our last 2 sessions. And please join us for our last session on November 17th. And thank you, Allison and Sharon. It was amazing as always. Such good information. We're so happy and thankful to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Bye.
Yes, this session will be added to our YouTube channel.
Yes. Bye.